Welcome to another virtual author chat at the Poison Pen Bookstore. I am John Charles, and today I'm thrilled to have back with us one of my favorite authors, Jillian Cantor, whose new book, The Greatest Lie of All, will soon be available in bookstores like the Poison Pen and libraries near you. If you'd like to pre-order a copy of The Greatest Lie of All through the Poison Pen, just give us a call or go online to the bookstore. We will be happy to add you to the list for what I think is one of the funnest books I've read in a long time.
Thank
Now,
you.
you're welcome. Now, I'd like to welcome Jillian.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm always fascinated by authors because we tend to think of them just in terms of the books they've written or what the work they've produced, but they were people before they were authors. So, who was Jillian before you became a published author?
That's a good question. I think that I am the same person that I am now. Honestly, my first book was published in 2009, I think. So, that was my kids were very little. I was, like a pretty young mom. I was always trying to find free time to write in between nap time. And now I have a college kid and a high school kid. So I think I'm the same the same person that I was back then, but I have a lot more free time because my kids are older. Um, I've pretty much been writing since college. I've been trying to publish, and I published my first book. Um, Gosh, I'm bad at math, and now I'm trying to do math on the fly. But it was like most of
Yes.
my adult life I've been publishing.
Did you
Um,
know when you were growing up that you wanted to be a writer, or did you have other aspirations or
I did, I had other aspirations too. I was always a big reader.
mm,
From a very, very young age. I remember being in elementary school and my mom would take me to the library in the summer. That was our big activity. We'd go to the library. You could check out 10 books. That was the limit. I'd check out my 10. I'd have them all read in like 2 days and I'd beg her to take me back. And she would. And I kind of quickly went through the whole, there wasn't really young adult books
yeah.
back then, but I quickly went through the whole like age appropriate section. And I remember being like 9 and reading all the Stephen King at the library next because I had run out of everything, which I loved, by the way. So I was always a big reader. I didn't really think that I was going to be a writer until I went to college, and then I thought that I was going to be a journalist, and I sort of started out with that. I was working for the newspaper at my college. I had an internship with the paper the summer after my freshman year, and I just absolutely hated it. I was so bored. Granted, I was the intern, so I was going to school board meetings all summer and graduations, but I just thought this is not what I like about writing. I want to tell a story. And when I went back to college that fall, I took a fiction writing class. So I was a sophomore in college then, 19, so I probably did know from about that point on that I wanted to be writing.
And your first book, was that The September Sisters that was published?
Yes, that was my first book that was published.
Was it easy to get your first book published, or was it many authors? It's a daunting journey.
It was a daunting journey. I I tried for years to get an agent with that book and just, like rejection after rejection. And I kind of put it away. I had a baby. I put the book away. I didn't look at it for a good year and a half. And um, my son was kind of a late talker, so he was close to 2 when he first started to talk. And then I don't know why, but one day it occurred to me that he was going to ask me, what I did. And I was going to have to say, well, I tried to write this novel, but I failed, or I always wanted to be a writer and I failed and didn't want to say that. So I pulled the book back out at that point, sent out another round of agent queries, and that was actually when I finally got my agent, which was in 2006. So I'm still with the same agent now,
Wow.
remarkably. Um, but I had been trying between probably like 2003 and 2006 to even get an agent. And then, once I got an agent, it took her a while to sell that book. So it was definitely a struggle. It was not easy.
Which brings us to your latest book, which will soon be out, The Greatest Lie of All. What can you tell us about it? What would you like readers to know about the book?
Well, The Greatest Lie of All, first of all, was so much fun to write. It was just a book that, sorry, my cat and my
Oh
dog are
no, it's
fighting
just
behind me,
adorable.
of course. But, they need to be a part of this. There is a cat and a dog in the book, I will add. But it was such a joy to write. It was a book that I just wrote because I was fascinated with the topic, and it was one of those things that just sort of like poured out of me. I was really excited about it. It's about an actress named Amelia, and she gets hired to um, play this woman who's this like famous romance novelist. Her name's Gloria Diamond. She's the most best-selling romance novel of all time. There's going to be a movie made of her life, and Amelia gets hired to play her in the movie. Um, and Amelia goes, to meet her, and she's a method actress, and she wants to learn as much about her as she can. And she sort of very quickly realizes that everything in this true story about her life isn't true at all. And so it's the intertwined stories of these two women, Amelia, who's been hired to play Gloria in the present day, and then you get to sort of see the real story of what happened in Gloria's life in like the 1980s and 1990s.
I think often there's this misperception that when you write fiction, you can just make everything up, but some of it has to be grounded in reality. You have to do, I'm guessing you have to do some research. I'm particularly interested, you talk about Amelia being a method actor. Was that something
Mhm.
that you had to do a bit of research into?
I did. Actually, I started reading a book that came out I think it was just called The Method. See, I might be wrong on this. I'd have to go find it, but it came out around the time I had first started writing, and I was just like really fascinated with it. And I knew Amelia was going to be an actress, but I was just reading this book, and then I thought, well, she's going to be a method actress because this is very interesting to me. Um, and also it really sort of played into the themes that I wanted in the book. I thought, well, if she's a method actress, not only does she have to play this part, but she has to like truly understand how to become this woman. And this woman is a complete lie. So how do you become someone who isn't authentic? Um, so I did do some research, and it was just something that I was personally fascinated by, so it was fun.
It is. There's so many famous actors and actresses that followed that school.
Yeah. And I mean, Amelia definitely struggles with the idea of it in the book too.
Let's talk a little bit about Gloria. Was she inspired in any part by real authors, or was this just something that you kind of came to full blown?
Well, I mean, I love the romance novelists of the 80s and 90s, like I said, I was a big reader growing up, and so definitely like Jackie Collins and
Yes,
Danielle
yeah.
Steele, and just sort of like the big personalities that they had, along with these big books that they wrote. And so Gloria is totally fictional, but she was just a little bit inspired for me by like a Jackie Collins, Danielle Steele type figure. And as you learn pretty quickly in the book, Gloria Diamond is not her real name, but I felt like that was just like the perfect name for this mega romance author who really, she really kind of lives her life out with the part. She has her diamond studded desk, and her, everything's diamond encrusted. She has this like crazy little dog who has all these diamond outfits. Um, so it was really fun to sort of make her up. And like that part is all fictional.
It is, but it also, you're right, there was definitely a time period in the 80s and 90s when those glitzy, glamorous
Yeah.
kind of books by Jackie Collins and Judith Krantz and all those other authors were hitting the bestseller list. And I think you kind of, in a little bit of a way, illuminate in your own book the tension there was between those authors and the critics because they were
Hmm.
incredibly successful. They made no apologies for what they wrote. Their fans loved it, and yet they were almost perennially trashed in
Yeah.
reviews in the press.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think that's also another thing that, you'll see about Gloria in the book is she's a little bit of a recluse,
Mhm.
or a lot of a recluse. She's very, very private. And so I think that plays into that as well.
This is not the first time that you've dabbled in the world of publishing and writing as an author. You explored classic authors like Jane Austen with her young adult novel, The Great Gatsby. You did your
Mhm.
kind of version of that. Your last book, The Fiction Writer, was almost an homage to Du Maurier and
Mhm.
Rebecca. What is it about that that makes you as a writer want to explore that topic, that theme?
Um, I think I'm just always interested in thinking about new perspectives on things. And so, in terms of like looking at a classic novel, my novel Beautiful Little Fools was a retelling of The Great Gatsby from the women's points of view. And so, in that case, it was like thinking about, well, how could these same plot elements unfold but mean something entirely different if we're seeing the women's perspectives? And even, The Greatest Lie of All is not really an homage to any classic work, but I think it also sort of delves into perspective. Like, how does the story change when we see these different angles of it? And you do definitely get to see Amelia's point of view. You get to see Gloria's point of view in the past, and I'm not gonna give any spoilers, but there's like a little bit more in terms of point of view in there as well.
Well, I think it's interesting because at least what I got from it was your take on the writing process to some degree. And there was a quote in that where Gloria is talking to Amelia about why fiction is better than real life. And she said to Amelia, and that's why stories are better than real life, Amelia. In
Hmm.
books, almost beautiful real men are self-centered jerks, but in books and on TV, we can write them the way we want, make them gorgeous, kind, good lovers to boot.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the only true things that Gloria says to Amelia when she's talking to her. But, just sort of the idea of that's what's so interesting about fiction. You can make a person be anything you want them to be, and in real life, you can't do that.
Yeah. There was another quote that I really thought was quite profound because you were talking about writing, and I never really thought about it in this way, but it kind of crystallized things for me. You wrote, sometimes as novelists, we write what we know, and sometimes we write what to escape what we know.
Hmm.
That's really kind of interesting. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think. There's times when I'm writing something because I'm trying to process my own experience of it. And even though I write fiction, sometimes there's like an emotion I'm trying to write through or something that happened and so I'm writing. And sometimes I'm just writing because it feels like an escape from the real world. I mean, I think that was especially true for me during the first part of the pandemic when we were all in lockdown. I was under contract to write Beautiful Little Fools, and I had to have it done in July of 2020. So it was like, well, there was this like all of this horrible stuff was going on around me, but every day I had to go, into like the 1920s, into these women's lives. And so I was escaping what was going on. But I think it's both.
Mhm. I think you're right, because I think sometimes aspiring writers are told you must know what you are writing. It has to be part of your DNA. But
Hmm.
you can learn about something and write it equally as well. And I think that also kind of, in some ways, it mirrors the reader's experience because you can read a book because you want to get some insight from someone who's lived through that experience and is writing about it and telling you, or you can just
Hmm.
escape into a story that's well told.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's a book that came out this spring that got a lot of really savage criticism. It's very lighthearted. It's not meant to be deep or dark or intense or anything. And one of the reviewers, it was actually Kirkus, said it was delightful piffle. And I think they were trying to kind of scorn it or deign it with faint praise. But there's nothing wrong with delightful piffle. Sometimes as a reader, that's what you want.
Yeah, and I mean, as a reader, I want both things too. You know, sometimes I just want to read this like really light book just to escape. And sometimes I want to read something that's going to just really make me think about something. And I don't think we have to always want one thing.
And you deliver both in all of your books. You
Thank
run
you.
the spectrum. Let's talk a little bit about the book from another perspective also, because it's also a book about mothers and the relationship between
Mhm.
mothers and children. Was that intentional when you were writing it, or did that just become organic as you went through the story?
Um, yeah, it was definitely intentional, but I mean I do think the story kind of lended itself to it. But I did go into that with that in mind. You know, I knew the book opens Amelia is basically getting ready to go to her mother's funeral. So, you know, obviously right from the beginning we know that there's going to be something about a mother-daughter relationship, and that does carry through the book, I think.
Mhm. There's also Will's relationship with his mother, Gloria.
Right. Gloria has a son, Will, and he has a very complicated relationship with his mother, and you know, her telling him the truth about his own childhood. You know, she doesn't just lie in her memoir, she lies to him. Um, yeah, so that's a big part of it too.
Now let's shift a little bit and go to the marketing aspect of books, and in particular, your latest book. Titles can make or break a book. A good title can be key, and you have a really good title, The Greatest Lie of All. Is that something you came up with? Is that something that your publisher helped you with? Why did
Um,
you?
no, I did not come up with it.
Okay.
I had another title that I still feel like the book is called in my heart.
Okay.
So I'm glad you like this title. I actually think my agent came up with this title. We were brainstorming titles back and forth for a while, my agent, my editor, and me. And so I think it was my agent who came up with this title, and we sort of all agreed on it. Um, but yeah, in my heart, the book has another title. So I'm glad to hear that you like this title because I don't know. I'm still like, I'm not sure.
Well, when I was looking at it, I was thinking it sounded like a quote that I had heard somewhere over the course of
Hmm.
my life. So I was looking up quotes on lies, and one of them that came up to me was the worst lies are the lies we tell ourselves, which comes from Richard Bach. And in some
Hmm.
ways, it kind of reflects on, in your book, almost everyone is lying about something.
Yes, that I mean that is true. And it does fit the book and that aspect. And you know, I know they kind of worked on the cover so you can see the word love under the word lie a little bit. So it's like a play on the
Oh,
greatest
yeah,
love
I
of
never
all, the
even
greatest,
noticed that. Wow.
yeah, the greatest lie of all. So I do I do see how that fits, but I don't know. We'll see how people like it. It was not my title. So I will
No.
say that. It was like a long back and forth discussion on what the title should be. So
And sometimes as an author, you have to exceed in terms of getting the book out to the public and readers.
exactly. And you know, it's interesting when it comes to titles. I will say like most of my titles were not my original titles, so there is always a point where I think the marketing people who know what sells books sort of step in and say, "No, your title's not good. We need a different one." So that happens to me a lot. So I'm definitely used to it. But it's always kind of interesting to when I'm writing a book, you know, I have in my head that's very specific thing that the title should be. And then when the people are marketing it, they're thinking about, well, what are going to draw readers in? What are going to, you know, draw booksellers in? And so it's always interesting to me to realize how different those two things are.
Let's talk a little bit about your writing process because that can differ from author to author.
Mhm.
Is your own process anything like Gloria's strict schedule in the book?
Um, a little bit. I mean, Gloria is very strict. She
Yeah.
writes, you know, every morning. She can't be disturbed. But I do sort of have like I do write every day when my kids are not home and I sort of have this like quiet window of time. It's definitely not strict like Gloria's. For instance, this morning I went to Costco when they opened so I could get my Thanksgiving shopping done because I was like, well, I'm gonna have to write when I get home because I need to fight Costco first. So I'm definitely more flexible than Gloria. But I am pretty regimented where it's like, well, every weekday, um, during the hours of 8 and 3, that's when I'm going to be writing, and I try not to schedule anything else.
Does your approach differ from book to book? Do you always know when you're starting out, this is exactly what I want to do, and you're pretty much going to format?
Um, my approach is somewhat different book to book. For instance, the book I'm writing now for my next book, it takes place over 20 years. And so it's this huge expanse of time. And I outlined it all before I wrote. I knew what was going to happen in each year. So I had this like 10-page outline before I started. The Greatest Lie of All, I felt a little more organically. It's like I knew what the secret of the book was going to be at the end. I knew where the book started. I knew where the book was going to end up. I sort of wrote myself to get there every day, and I didn't have an outline. So it's not always the same. When I wrote Beautiful Little Fools, that was another one I outlined because it was a retelling of The Great Gatsby. So I had it like very methodically sort of outlined out to coincide with what happened in The Great Gatsby. Um, but it's sort of book dependent for me. I think my organic process as a writer is what I did for The Greatest Lie of All, where it's like I know where the book starts, I sort of know what the twist is or where I want it to end, and I get to sit down every day and sort of figure out how to get there. And that's the most fun part for me.
It's interesting because it is a dual timeline book in many
Mhm.
ways. So were you writing one timeline and then doing the other, or did you switch back and forth?
No, I wrote it out as you read it now. And then when I was revising it, I did revise one timeline at a time. But I like to try to write it all in order, and I do this for all of my books. I like to try to write them all in the order that it's going to be read, and that's sort of the only way I can see the pacing for myself. But then when I revise it, I do pull out each story, read it all together to kind of make sure it makes sense and revise it that way.
Hmm. You do have a master's of fine arts in writing, and I've always wondered, has that been helpful when you write? And I'm not saying this in a bad way, but commercial fiction, because there's always this tension between literary fiction and commercial fiction.
Um, I mean, in general, I don't think it was that helpful. That that helpful to me. I got my master's and I did it right after college, so I was very young and early in my writing career when I did it. And I mean, I wrote a novel while I was there, which was never published, but it did sort of help me like get through the process of writing a novel. And I also took a lot of screenwriting classes when I was getting my MFA, which I feel like was really helpful in terms of like thinking about storytelling and dialogue and pacing and structure. And so all of those things helped me going forward. But I don't think in general it was not something that I needed to do what I do for sure.
What's the best piece of advice you've been given with regards to writing?
I think the best piece of advice is very simple. It's just butt in chair.
Mhm.
And it's like, you can always find a reason not to write or some way to procrastinate, and you just have to sit down and make yourself do it. And you can always revise something. You can revise bad words, you can't revise no words.
Yeah. Let's switch a little bit and talk about Jillian as a reader, because one of the things I loved about The Greatest Lie of All is when you're talking about people like Amelia's mom and her love of Gloria Diamond's books and how
Mhm.
she would just wait for the new one to come in the bookstore, run down, get it, read it. That captures kind of what readers have for their favorite authors. Who are some of your Gloria Diamond authors and books?
Um, well, like I said, from a very young age, it was Stephen King. That was sort of like my teen. And it's really funny because my son is like obsessed with Stephen King and reads everything he's ever written, like more than I was. So I think he was probably one of the first people that I was obsessed with. But then Alice Hoffman, I love, I always like to get her new books. Um, Oh my gosh, now I'm gonna have to go reference my Goodreads page. I think in general, I tend to buy a lot more books than I have time to read. And I mean, you can see a little bit behind me. I have some stacks of books here in my office, and I belong to like Book of the Month and Aardvark, and I'm ordering a book every month, and then they stack up behind me. And um, whenever I have a few weeks off, like usually between Christmas and New Year's is a big reading time for me, or if I go on vacation in the summer, I pick up my big stack of books and I read everything I'd been intending to read all year. Um, but I don't know that I have too many. I can't off the top of my head think of like
Well,
another
I'm-
specific author that I
you
always buy. It's more that I'm sort of always like, oh, this book looks great. I want to read it, and I buy it, and then it stacks up in my office until I have the time to get to them.
well, it sounds like you read across genres too. You don't
I
limit
I
yourself.
do. Yeah, I do. Yeah, I mean I read everything, and it really kind of just depends on what I'm in the mood for. If I'm writing, and I have been working on my next book um since like last January, pretty strictly. That's all I've been doing. And so if I'm writing, I try not to read in the genre that I'm writing in at all. I find it like it confuses my voice. So I'll read nonfiction or young adult or just or I'll read a romance novel. I love a good romance novel. I would have read all of Gloria Diamond's books if they were real.
Um, Now I forgot what I was going to ask you. Oh well. I also get the impression that classic authors were an important part of your reading background, like F. Scott Fitzgerald.
Mm. Well, I always loved The Great Gatsby. I loved it the first time I read it in high school, but I had then this thought in my head that it was a love story. And then I read it again in college and I thought, this is not a love story at all. This is sort of like a stalking.
Mhm.
I looked at it differently with a few more years of age. But I always thought The Great Gatsby was just so beautifully written. It's kind of short, it's easy to read. I don't reread a lot of books, but that's a book I'll take out once every year or two and reread. Um, but I was always like really fascinated by the women characters in that book because they're so crucial to the plot. But if you read the book, they barely speak and we don't really know what they're thinking. And so I always was like wondering about the women. And when the copyright expired on that book and I had the opportunity to write their story myself, that was something that I had always wanted to do.
What about Jane Austen? Does she still hold appeal for you?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, the same thing. I do, you mentioned my young adult book, The Code for Love and Heartbreak, which is a retelling of
Um,
Emma set in modern day high school. Um, and Jane Austen, I mean, is sort of like the original romance
yeah.
novelist in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Any thoughts to returning to young adult at some point?
Uh, Maybe, yeah, we'll see. I mean, I would love to. I think the young adult market is sort of like trending away from the kind of books that I write at the moment, but you never know when it's going to come back.
That's the one thing you can say about publishing. It never stays still. It's always changing.
That's true. It's always changing. So yeah, I never say never for anything in publishing.
Now, you can say as much or as little as you'd like about this next question, because I know authors can be kind of um, territorial about their work, but would you like to tell us anything about what's next coming from you?
Yeah, I'm working on a book. I think I mentioned that it was set over 20 years. It's about three sisters who inherit their grandmother's house in Coronado in 1999, and they make a pact to come the same week every year, the three of them. And they do for 20 years. And then in 2019, one of the sisters doesn't show up. And so it goes sort of back through all the years. You get to see their relationship, what happened, and sort of ask the question of like, well, how well can you ever really know, even your sisters? So
It
it's been
sounds
very fun. It takes place over a long period of time, like I said, so I did outline it.
um, in some cases this can be a plus and others a minus, but sometimes you write such very different books in terms of
Mhm.
how they can be marketed or sold to readers. Has that been challenging for you because it's not like, oh, that's the next John Grisham thriller, or that's the next.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, it's not challenging for me. Is it challenging for the poor people marketing my books? It might be. I just feel like I don't want to write the same book over and over again. And I think my books thematically do have a lot of connections, even though they're not all the same type of book. I'm always trying to write about strong women characters. There's almost always a love story, always some kind of a mystery. So I do think that there are threads between them, but yeah, definitely, I've written historical books, I've written contemporary books, I've written young adult books. um but for me, that's what I like. I never get bored, which I love. um but I don't know, I don't know, we'd have to talk to the marketing people and see if they're struggling.
I think they should look at it as an opportunity, and readers should too, because you're right. If you're not bored, readers are not going to be bored reading your books. And I think sometimes you're right. Authors have a voice, and your voice
Mhm.
carries over from book to book. That's the same. That's your fingerprint,
Yeah,
DNA. The stories might be a little bit different, but if you like an author's voice, you're going to like all of your books. That's because that's that consistent quality.
yeah.
How can readers find out more about you? Are you on social media? Where will you announce when this new book is coming? What?
Yeah, I'm mostly on Instagram, and I'm just at Jillian Cantor. And my website is jilliancantor.com, but mostly Instagram, and I definitely will announce soon about the new book too.
Oh, that's great. I can't believe how quickly our time has gone by. We've been very fortunate to have with us the talented Jillian Cantor, whose new book is The Greatest Lie of All, available soon, just in time for Christmas book giving. I'd like to thank Jillian for being here with us today, sharing her thoughts. And for those tuning in, thank you for joining us for another virtual author chat at the Poison Pen Bookstore.
All right, thank you for having me.
Thank you.